This week on Friday, after completing my tasks for the week and winding up a few more things, Becky came to my office door. "Have you heard about what's happening in Paris?" she said. And I had not. There is a terrorist attack, multiple locations. At this point, it looks like there are 30 dead. I briefly got online and started to research. Not much had been posted at that point. But by the time I got home, the situation had changed. Images were starting to pour in. A woman in gray and black stumbling from a place of wreckage with tears streaming down her face. All around her is torn metal and concrete, an ambulance in the distance. You can almost smell the smoke that's hanging in the air after the bombing. A second image, an entrance to a stadium, dozens of men in orange vests with reflective stripes standing at the entrance. They look to be hesitating. Are they hesitating to go in, or are they waiting for someone to come out? Another image, a woman wrapped in a gold metallic blanket that identifies her as a victim. Arms and legs strapped into a chair that seems to have wheels that are being dragged by two men in emergency vests. A look of torture and horror on her face. You could almost hear through the picture the sounds of yelling and confusion and worry. Images that just kept coming in, kept unfolding. By Friday night, at least 128 dead. NBC reports that this is the worst infliction of violence on France since World War II. And then we learn of the others. Earlier in the week, a bombing in Beirut, Baghdad, Lebanon. And then on Saturday, a shooting in Kenya that killed 147. My heart is aching today. In his poem, Mentioning of Souls, Gerald Stein writes of standing at night by the window, transfixed by the moon, counting over the names of the dead. You can close your eyes, he says. I will say the names and remember with your lips as I go over the victories and failures of the dead. The names, the lives, the heartbreak, that is what we have this morning. And on Friday night, as detail after detail piled up, as I looked out my own window towards the sliver of moon that hung precariously in the sky, I knew it was time to put aside my sermon and start anew. I couldn't imagine anything else. Contemplating Sunday, all I could think of was, what about Paris? What about Paris? As more comes out about this, I have no doubt that we will learn the players who set the terrible series of events in motion. At this point, some claim that ISIS had its hand in it. Others claim that Al-Qaeda is responsible. In one sense, this matters little. After all, the details will not change the names of the dead. But they can help us to understand, help us to grasp the historical realities that allow this kind of violence to flourish. And that's something, even if it's not much. Whether ISIS or Al-Qaeda, this appears to be the work of extremists motivated by ideology. What we are seeing in France is the impingement of extremists from beyond French borders and also the radicalization of France's own citizens. It's important to note that both American and French citizens have been recruited by these extremist organizations. And with all of the destruction, we might do ourselves well to ask, why? What is the appeal of this kind of ideology? I think that the appeal lies in the ideology. To be motivated ideologically is to be motivated by the force of an idea whose logic locks its actors on a path towards destruction and death. The political philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote that ideology is the application of an idea to history. What makes it unique is that it treats the idea as if it were a bare fact, as if it were as true as the law of gravity, incontestable. Such an idea becomes the bedrock principle for its followers. And this means that all of their actions will attempt to align with this principle or idea. And likewise, actions motivated by a different principle, by a different idea, will be viewed as inconsequential or maybe even threatening. Ideologies are comforting in that they offer total explanation, excluding from the worldview anything that contradicts or challenges them. Arendt writes, "The claim to total explanation promises to explain all historical happenings, the total explanation of the past, the total knowledge of the present, and the reliable prediction of the future." While this is comforting to those who believe it, it's often terrifying to those who don't. When a person is adjusted to an ideology, he or she is propelled by the force of its logic. If X is true, then I must do Y. With this terrible, inexorable movement towards its conclusion, the most heinous crimes begin to seem not only acceptable, but inevitable. In other words, crimes against humanity, murder, torture, are seen as the unfortunate cost of bringing about a secular utopia or realizing God's will on earth. Now, the ideological process does not hold for all ideas. Not all ideas become ideologies. The distinctive feature of an ideology is that the idea has become a lens through which the rest of history is interpreted. It therefore crowds out other ideas that are inconvenient to it, such as the idea of inherent worth and dignity. Human dignity is an example of something that might be explained away by an ideology. Ideologues will say it is the defense of the weak who are unable or unwilling to do what's necessary to bring about the end of history. We all know that to make an omelet, we have to break some eggs, right? I would argue that in this sense, ideology mirrors the logic of torture. In her book, The Body in Pain, Harvard professor Elaine Scarry writes about torture. And what she finds after reviewing hundreds of detailed accounts of people who were tortured is that their humanity was very neatly swept up and put aside. In the infliction of pain known as the telephone torture, the cries of pain from the person are described as the rings of a telephone. It rings until it finally picks up and gives the torturer the information that he needs. The victims in this instance are literally seen as a machine that provides information and nothing more. There are dozens of other examples. But what is crucial here is that the information that is gained from the victim trumps the victim's humanity in every sense. Dignity is an inconsequential aside, a minor inconvenience to the end result. I find it utterly breathtaking, the sheer number of instances in which dignity is treated as an inconvenient aside. The attacks in Paris this week offer 128 examples of that. The ones in Kenya, 147. But what is a number, really? A number can hide as much as it explains. A number hides names. It hides people. In Paris, Valentin Ribbet was a Paris lawyer and graduate of the London School of Economics and Political Science. He is dead. Lola Salines was at the concert hall, the Bataclan Concert Hall, where she was shot dead. Nohemi Gonzalez from El Monte, California, was a junior studying design, according to a statement that came out of Cal State Long Beach. She was murdered. Briton Nick Alexander was killed at the Bataclan while working with an American heavy metal band. He is dead. Louise Philip Val, who was married, lived in Paris for the past 8 years and was a musician. His life is over. As if 128 names and lives are not bad enough, now other lives that had already been vulnerable, will become even more vulnerable. The refugees fleeing Syria, for instance, are likely to find more closed gates ahead of them. Mainstream Muslims who already labor under suspicion and misconception may be lumped in with extremists. Overnight, the world has become an even more deadly and inhospitable place to many, many people. Is there any hope? Hours before the events in Paris unfolded, Laura Bennett sent me an article by the educator Julia Steiny. It is a somewhat random blog post, but it could not fit better with the message today. Steiny writes about how the word respect has always made her cringe a little bit. It is one of the words that is batted around by politicians, but that often carries little actual meaning. At least that's what she thought until she started to do her own research. It turns out that the root of the word respect means to look twice. The prefix re, R-E, means to do again, as in rework or reimagine. And then spect is linked to the same Latin root as spectator, which of course means someone who looks. Respect is to look again. Respect, in the sense of looking again, is an active thing. It is a practice. Perhaps it is even a discipline. It's a habit, a way of looking at the world and not taking things at face value, not neatly setting inconvenient things aside, but rather looking at them again, choosing to see more deeply and more fully. To respect someone is to look at them in all of their fullness rather than through a simplistic frame. It is to look at them again even when an ideology tells us that we should set them aside. In this sense, respect, I think, is the antidote to ideology. Where ideologies ask us to accept as incontestable some basic idea and to do away with anything that contradicts it, respect asks us to look again, to look twice. We look once and we see what it was that ideology told us to see, a label, a caricature. We look twice, and perhaps we see beyond. Perhaps we see deeper. Perhaps we see another child of God or a fellow human being who loves and hurts like we do. Perhaps we see a person whose worth exceeds any convenience or cost. Does that matter? Is that just too little, too late? Will it help at all that we look again in order to find someone's dignity and their worth? It can seem like our voice is so small and inconsequential when put side by side with the ideologies that play themselves out on the world stage. But I wonder what it would mean for us to offer this conviction to the world that respect matters, that dignity matters. I wonder what it means for those whose dignity has been denied to hear such a thing, such as the French or Beirut or Lebanon or Kenyan victims. The victims who were told that their lives were nothing but an inconvenience to the ideologies that drove their attackers. Does this matter? I will give the last word today to an anonymous high school student. His poem, which was published on the internet and put forward by Mark Hicks, is called Mattering. My father asked if I am gay, and I asked, does it matter? He said, no, not really. I said, yes. He said, get out of my life. I guess it mattered. My friend asked if I need to mention my race, and I asked, does it matter? He said, no, not really. I told him yes, and he said, you need to get that chip off your shoulder. I guess it mattered. My neighbor asked why I put that ramp up to my front door, and I said, does it matter? He said, no, not really. I told him because it made my life easier. He said, is there a way to make it less obvious? I guess it mattered. And then my God asked me, do you love yourself? And I said, does it matter? And she said, yes. And I said, how can I love myself? I'm gay, I'm Latino, I'm disabled. And she said, that is the way I made you. And now nothing will ever matter again. When you tell someone in this world that they matter, in spite of all the ideology and violence that tells them that they don't, well, I want to say today that maybe in the final estimation, that will be the only thing that matters. My spiritual companions, my heart is with you today. Let's sing together. Number 1014.